It happened again. Not loudly, not in a way that others would notice, but inside, it was unmistakable, a quiet collapse. The kind that does not break the world around you, only something within. He stood there for a moment, not moving, as if time itself had paused to watch. There were no voices now, no one pointing, no one speaking, just a stillness that felt heavier than any noise. How many times had it been? The question did not need an answer. It lingered in the air like a soft echo, familiar and unwelcome. Each attempt had carried a small hope, a quiet belief that this time might be different, and each time it had slipped away just as gently. He did not sigh. Even that felt like too much. Instead, he lowered his gaze, not in shame exactly, but in a kind of quiet acceptance, as if somewhere deep inside he had already begun to expect this ending. And yet, it still hurt. Not sharply. Not in a way that demanded attention, but in a slow, steady way. Like a weight placed carefully on the chest, pressing just enough to remind him that it was there. He wondered for a brief moment what it would feel like to succeed. Not the loud kind of success that others celebrate, but the quiet kind. The kind that lets you breathe a little easier. The kind that lets you rest. Would it feel different? Or would it simply be another moment, passing like all the others? The thought faded as quickly as it came. Around him, everything remained unchanged. The same space, the same silence, the same still air that seemed to hold all the things left unsaid. It was strange, in a way. From the outside, nothing had truly happened. There were no marks, no signs, no visible proof of what had just taken place. To anyone watching, it would seem like just another ordinary moment. But inside, something had shifted again. A small piece of hope, perhaps. Or maybe just a little more energy, quietly slipping away. He did not try to hold on to it this time. There was a time when he would have fought harder, when he would have searched for reasons, for explanations, for something to blame or something to fix. His mind would race, turning over every detail, asking questions that never seemed to lead anywhere. Why did it happen? What could have been different? What was missing? But now, those questions felt distant. Not because they had been answered, but because they no longer seemed to matter in the same way. He had asked them before, many times, and still, here he was. So instead, he stood quietly, letting the moment pass through him without resistance. Not pushing it away, not holding on to it, just allowing it to be what it was. A failure. The word itself felt heavy, but he did not repeat it in his mind. He did not give it more space than it had already taken. There was something different in this stillness, not strength, not yet, but a kind of quiet awareness. He could feel everything, and yet he did not react to it. The disappointment, the tiredness, the faint sting of doubt, they were all there, moving gently beneath the surface. And still he remained. Why was it so quiet? He noticed it then. The absence of noise inside his own thoughts. No rush to defend himself. No sudden need to explain. No desperate attempt to turn this moment into something else. Just silence. At first, it felt almost unsettling, as if something important was missing. But then, slowly, it began to feel different, softer, less heavy. He realized that this silence was not empty. It was simply not filled with the usual noise. It was a space where nothing needed to be said. And in that space, he could finally see the moment for what it truly was. Not an ending, just another step, quiet and unnoticed, along a path that no one else seemed to see. He did not smile, but something inside him became still. And for the first time, the silence did not feel like defeat. It felt like something waiting. They began to notice. Not at first, not clearly. Just small things. The way he no longer rushed to explain himself. The way his words had become fewer, softer, sometimes not coming at all. At first, it confused them. They had been used to something else. A reaction, a defense, a visible effort to correct what had gone wrong. But now, there was only quiet. And in that quiet, they started to form their own conclusions. Maybe he had given up. Maybe he no longer cared. Maybe he simply did not have the strength to try again. They did not ask him these things. They did not need to. Their silence carried its own quiet judgments, drifting through the air in ways that could be felt without being spoken. He could sense it. Not in words, but in glances, in pauses that lasted just a little too long, in the subtle shift of presence when he entered a space, and the way it settled again when he said nothing. It would have been easy to respond, to explain what was happening inside him, to tell them that the silence was not emptiness, that it was not weakness, that it was not the end of anything. But he did not. Instead, he remained as he was, still, watching. There was a time when their thoughts would have reached him more deeply, when he would have felt the need to correct them, to show them that they were wrong, that he was still trying, still searching, still holding on in ways they could not see. But now, something had changed. Their misunderstanding no longer pulled at him in the same way. It was there, yes, a faint tension beneath the surface, a quiet awareness that they did not see him clearly. But it did not disturb his stillness. Why? He did not fully understand it yet. He only knew that the urge to react, to defend, to prove, had grown quieter. Not gone completely, but softened. As if it no longer held the same importance it once did, they continued to watch him in their own way, waiting, perhaps, for something to break the silence, for a sign that he would return to what they understood, something familiar, something that fit their expectations. But nothing came, and so their assumptions deepened. Silence, after all, is easy to misread. When no words are given, people begin to create their own. They fill the empty space with meanings that feel comfortable to them, even if those meanings are far from the truth. He could see it happening, and for a brief moment, a very brief moment, He wondered if he should speak. Would it make things easier? Would it change the way they saw him? Would it bring some kind of relief, even if only for a little while? The questions passed through his mind like a soft breeze, touching gently and then moving on. He did not follow them because somewhere deeper, beneath the surface of these passing thoughts, there was a quiet understanding beginning to form. Not everything needs to be corrected. Not every misunderstanding needs to be cleared. And not every silence is meant to be filled. He did not arrive at this understanding all at once. It came slowly, like the night settling over the day without being noticed. Gradual, unforced. He simply stood within it, letting them think what they would, letting the silence remain. There was a certain discomfort in this, a subtle one, the kind that does not shout, but lingers gently. A reminder that being unseen or misunderstood is never completely easy. But even that discomfort began to change. It no longer pushed him to act. It no longer demanded a response. It simply existed and then faded, like everything else. And in its place, something quieter began to grow. A space where he no longer needed their understanding to feel steady. A place where their thoughts, whether right or wrong, did not define what he carried within. They could believe what they wanted. They could see weakness where there was silence. They could mistake stillness for defeat. And still, he remained unchanged. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he was beginning to understand that saying nothing was in its own way a choice. And that choice, though invisible to them, was slowly shaping something within him that they could not touch, something they could not misread, something that did not depend on their understanding at all. He did not explain it. He did not show it. He simply held it quietly as the silence around him deepened. And for the first time, being misunderstood did not feel like something he needed to escape. It felt like something he could simply allow. There came a moment, small and almost unnoticeable, when something inside him shifted, not in a dramatic way, not with clarity or certainty, just a quiet pause, deeper than the others. He found himself standing once again in that familiar space where something could be said, where a response was expected, where the silence almost invited a reaction. And for a brief second, the old feeling returned. That pull, that quiet pressure rising from within, asking him to speak, to correct, to make things clear. It was not loud, but it was there, steady and familiar. He watched it, not pushing it away, not following it either, just noticing. Why does it feel so necessary to respond? The question came softly, without judgment. It did not demand an answer. It simply rested there, like a thought waiting to be understood. He had never asked it this way before. Before, the reactee had always come first. Quick and almost automatic. Words would form before he even realized what he truly felt. A need to be seen correctly, to not be misunderstood, to protect something invisible but deeply important. But now there was space. Enough space to see the feeling before it became action. And in that space, something became clearer. Not everything that calls for a reaction deserves one. The thought did not arrive as a rule or a lesson taught by someone else. It came from within, quiet and steady, as if it had always been there, waiting for him to notice. He looked at the moment again. Nothing had really changed on the outside. The same expectations, the same unspoken tension, the same subtle weight in the air, and yet it no longer felt the same, because this time he could see the choice. He could react, he could speak, explain, defend, reshape the way things were being seen, or he could remain silent. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of understanding. The realization was simple, almost too simple, and yet it carried a quiet strength he had never felt before. He did not need to chase every misunderstanding. He did not need to answer every doubt. He did not need to give his energy to every moment that asked for it. There was something powerful in that, though it did not feel powerful in the way people often imagine. It felt calm, grounded, unmoving. He let the moment pass. No words, no explanation, just silence. At first, it felt unfamiliar, like stepping into something unknown. There was a slight tension, a subtle awareness of what could have been said, but wasn't. But then, that feeling softened. Nothing broke. Nothing was lost. The world did not shift or fall apart because he chose not to react. Everything simply continued. And within him, something settled, a quiet kind of certainty. He began to see that silence was not the absence of strength. It was a form of it, a form that did not need to be seen to exist, a form that did not depend on being understood. He stood there a little longer, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, as if he was gently observing this new way of being, allowing it to become familiar. Was this what it meant to be steady? Not reacting to every movement around him, but remaining grounded within himself. The question did not need a clear answer, because he could feel it. A subtle shift, like something aligning quietly beneath the surface. He was still the same. Nothing outward had changed, and yet everything felt different. The need to prove himself had loosened its grip. The urge to correct every misunderstanding had faded into the background. In its place, there was space, and in that space, there was peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. He took a slow breath, barely noticeable, and for the first time, the silence he held did not feel like something he was carrying. It felt like something that was carrying him. Gently, steadily, without effort. And in that quiet understanding, he no longer felt the need to become anything else. He simply remained as he was, unmoved by what once would have pulled him apart. And the silence stayed with him, not as an escape, but as a choice. Time passed, not in a way that could be measured, but in the way small changes begin to settle quietly into place. Nothing around him seemed different. The same faces, the same unspoken expectations, the same subtle glances that once carried weight. And yet, something had softened, not in them, in him. He no longer waited for understanding. That quiet need, the one that once lingered beneath every moment, hoping to be seen clearly, had begun to fade. Not completely, but enough that it no longer shaped his every though. They still misunderstood him at times. They still filled his silence with meanings that were never his. But now it passed through him like a gentle wind, noticed but not held. He did not reserve it. He did not absorb it. He simply allowed it to be. There was a strange kind of freedom in that. Not the kind that feels exciting or loud, but the kind that feels steady. The kind that does not rise and fall with every passing moment. He began to notice things he had not seen before. The way silence could create space, not just around him, but within him. The way his thoughts no longer rushed forward, no longer tangled themselves in endless explanations. There was less noise now. And in that quiet, he could hear something else, a calm he had never known. It was not something he searched for. It arrived on its own, slowly, like the first light before morning. He found himself standing in moments that once would have unsettled him and feeling nothing pull him away from himself. No urgency, no need to react, no quiet panic to fix what others believed. Just stillness. Was this what he had been moving toward all along? Not success, as he once imagined it, did. Not the approval he thought he needed, but this quiet sense of being undisturbed. The question lingered, but it did not trouble him, because the answer, in a way, was already there. He could feel it in the way he breathed, in the way he no longer rushed to fill empty spaces, in the way silence no longer felt like something to escape. It had become a place he could rest. They still spoke in their own ways, sometimes with words, sometimes without. Sometimes their presence carried doubt, or quiet judgment, or assumptions that once would have echoed loudly in his mind. But now, those echoes faded quickly. They no longer stayed. He no longer gave them a place to settle. And in that, something him grew stronger. Not sharp, not forceful, just steady. Like a quiet foundation that did not shift, no matter what passed over it. He realized then that strength does not always appear as action. It does not always need to be seen or recognized. Sometimes it is simply the ability to remain unchanged. Even when everything around you invites you to become something else. He did not announce this understanding. He did not share it. There was no need, because it was not something meant for others. It was his. A quiet truth, held gently, without the need to prove it. The failures that once felt heavy now seemed distant, not erased, not forgotten, but no longer defining. They had led him here, to this quiet place within himself, where nothing needed to be explained, and nothing needed to be defended. He stood there in that stillness with no urgency to move forward and no desire to return to what had been. Everything felt enough. And in that feeling, there was a calm unlike anything he had known before. Not because everything was resolved, but because he no longer needed it to be. The silence remained. But now, it was no longer something that followed him. It was something he carried gently, without effort. And in that quiet, unseen by others, a change had already taken place. Not sudden, not dramatic, but real. And it stayed with him, steady and unshaken, as the world around him continued, unaware that anything had changed at all.